water, especially rainwater harvesting and things like that, improving water availability within cities as well as in rivers. So I thought, let me just start by talking a little bit about rivers, then rivers in general, ecosystems in general, and then moving on to an actual river restoration case study, which we are working on. So it will be divided into two sessions. The first session will be rather simplistic in nature. So excuse me if I sound just too simple. I'm sure there are many of you who have been working in river projects and they understand rivers, but just because it's always a heterogeneous crowd, I like to start with a very simple understanding of what rivers are. This is, like I said, I'll talk about rivers in general, Indian river system, a little bit about economic and ecological value of rivers, riverine ecosystem services, and finally we'll talk about a river restoration case, which is a very small river that we are working on, the Ram Nadi in Pune. So if you look at this beautiful sketch of how the river travels from the source to the mouth of the river, which is done by my very close friends, Oikos in Pune, you will see that the mountains are always the source region of the river. That the mountain range is actually dividing the rainfall. So if you have let's say the Western Ghats in some places get around 7,000, 8,000 millimeters of rainfall. Half of the rainfall is going to drain into the Arabian Sea and half of it is going to drain into the Bay of Bengal. That's why mountains are called as the rain divide. And the source regions are always the catchments of the biggest rivers and even small streams. Then moving on, they come to the plains where the mountains are no longer there. It's very much a plain undulating landscape where they slow down and then they move towards the mouth, which is at the confluence of the sea. So they move into the sea, and that's the last journey of the rivers. If you look at the source region, these are typical photographs of source region, and then there are very diagnostic things which you can say are about the source region. So like I said earlier, all source regions would basically be mountainous. They would have essentially very rapid flow because of the slopes which are present in the mountains, right? And the channels will really be narrow because there's not a lot of water which is coming into the rivers at that point of time. They're going to be joined by several tributaries, streams, first and second order stream. And then as it reaches the plain, it is going to be wider. So in the mountains, it's going to be a narrower channel. And because of the rapid flow, there is going to be a very high erosion. And this erosion is so severe that you can see large boulders like these fallen in source rivers. So if you see a photograph with a river with large boulders, then you can think of it that this is the source region, because that's where these large boulders come hurtling down from the slopes and enter the river channel. So and one very typical diagnostic aspect of the source region is waterfalls. And that's also because there are sudden altitudinal changes, drops in altitude, where the water has to negotiate its way from a higher altitude to a lower altitude in a very short space, and that creates waterfalls. And these are extremely important small habitats for a variety of species. Right, you have some species of flora which are typically seen only in what is called as a spray zone. So wherever the water is spraying onto rocks, and it's a very hard surface for any trees to germinate, these small vegetation, these herbs and grasses you will find in the spray zones. And typically these will be spots for roosting of owls and roosting of some other specific birds, and this creates wonderful habitat for that. So waterfalls are very important in this sense. When the river hits the plain, it will essentially try to find a way of least resistance, and when it is trying to do so, it may break up into various braids, like you see here. This is the photograph of the Tons River near Dehradun. Tons is a river which originates in the Himalaya and then goes on to meet the Yamuna. as long as the Tons River is in the Himalaya, it's a very narrow, deep channel. And as soon as it hits the plains near Dehradun, it breaks into literally 100 braids. This is also what you observe in many other rivers, the Ganga, the Yamuna, the Tista. It's beautifully seen in the Tista. Tista near Darjeeling is a very, very small river as it flows down from the Himalayas. And then as soon as it hits the town of Sevok, it breaks into 100 braids. And these braids are essentially ways where water finds lesser resistance than the places where water is not flowing. And then because it widens, the flow settles down, the flow as in kind of slows down, and you will see very nice, very smooth, slow flowing rivers like you see near the Taj Mahal, or you can also see all these meanders, these beautiful meanders which you see here are essentially because the river is finding its own way of least resistance, and that's why this is very typically seen. So the diagnostic characteristics of plains are that it will always be a plain area. It will not be mountainous, much wider channels, braided flows, and these are the places where deposition has started, right? And the sediment load which the river gets it gets finer and finer. Earlier in the source, we saw large boulders and stones. If you look at the Himalayan rivers, you will see nice rounded pebbles and stones which are there. As it flows down on the plains, then it gets smaller and smaller. And finally, at the mouth, where it meets the sea, the river is at its slowest. And here on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the Sundarban area, where it is really thousands and thousands of braids have been created because of these mud flats, huge deposition of silt, which is happening for millions of years, which is being brought from the Himalayas. Okay, right. So that's at the mouth of the river. So this is the like I said, the diagnostic things that you see at the mouth of the river would basically be, it will either be breaking up into a delta, which is like the Sundarban, or estuary, which you see on the eastern coast, which are smaller than the deltas. They don't have as much silt deposition as you see in the Himalayan rivers. You would probably have mud flats like you see in Mumbai. If you go to Airoli and Shivdi, you will see mud flats there, or you will see mangroves, which you can see in the Sundarbans, which you can see on the eastern coast, which you can see in Pichavaram near Chennai, so many other places. And changing braids, most of these braids are not static at all. Over 100 years, they will change their course, because these are braids which are coming up due to the flow of water. This sediment is being deposited here, because if you look at what gets carried towards the mouth of the river is the finest sediment which remains in suspension. And because of these mud flats and mangroves and estuaries, it gets trapped there and the siltation starts taking place. So if you look at the Indian river system, this is what you will essentially see. You basically have got two source regions of India's rivers and two drainage areas of India's river. And if you cross-tabulate them, you get 4 different types of rivers, and each one of these types has got different personalities. So if you look at the rivers, you have the biggest rivers, some of the biggest Indian rivers, which is Ganga, the Yamuna, you have Kosi, Gomati, Brahmaputra, Gandak, so on. So all of these are originating in the Himalaya, and they are flowing into the Bay of Bengal. So if you look at Brahmaputra, for example, it originates in Tibet, in the Trans-Himalayas, and the Ganga also originates somewhere near that. It's not very far. It's about 200 to 300 kilometers away from the source region of Brahmaputra. But because Brahmaputra flows through the Trans-Himalayas, enters India at a very low latitudinal Himalayan area, and then flows down. And because it flows over the Indo-Gangetic plain, the personalities of both the rivers are completely different. For a very long time, the Brahmaputra is a very small river until it comes into India and flows over the plains. But the Ganga is a very wide river right after it hits the plains. Right. The Kosi is a magnificent river, and it is perhaps the only river which has got its source region as Mount Everest. So the Kosi then enters from Mount Everest, it starts melting, and then later it joins the Indo-Gangetic system. The Himalayan rivers, which don't flow into the Bay of Bengal, flow into Pakistan. So the Ravi, the Bias, Satluj, Indus, Chenab, all of these rivers finally move from the Indian Himalayas into the plains of Pakistan, and then they drain out into the Arabian Sea. The Peninsula Rivers, as you know, the only major source region of the Peninsula Rivers are the Western Ghats, the northern Western Ghats and the southern Western Ghats. And the largest rivers, peninsular rivers, which drain into the Bay of Bengal are the Krishna, and some of them which drain into the Arabian Sea. The biggest ones is, of course, Narmada, Tapi, Sabarmati, Mahi. But you have a host of very small rivers which flow in the Konkan belt, the coastal belt of Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Kerala. And these would be the Savitri, the Netravati, Jagabudi, Vashishti, Tansamit, all of these kind of rivers which flow there. So if you look at, let me just see if I can pick up. If I were to draw a line like this, can you see me drawing this line?
Yes, yes.
So approximately, right? I mean, I can't draw it perfectly because I've got a PPT and a mouse. But if you see this line, this is the water divide of India. Right, one drop which falls to the left hand side will drain into the Arabian Sea, and one drop of rain which falls onto the right hand side will drain into the Bay of Bengal. And this becomes a very important dividing line because that decides the characteristics of the rivers on each side. And of course, like I said, the Himalayan and the Peninsula rivers are also very different from each other. So that becomes a defining characteristic of the Indian Peninsula system. So let's just talk about the riverine ecosystem a little bit. What you see in this photograph is a very beautiful river, which is a very small river. It's not too large river. It's not very wide. It doesn't have too much flow of water. It's probably just out of the mountains and it's hitting the plains, and you can see some physical elements there. So there is, of course, sunlight, water, soil, all of that which you can see. There are rocks and so there is mud, all of this. But there are also biological elements in this photograph. So you have the flora, the fauna, you have herbs, you have shrubs, there are grasses, there are trees. You have small insects which you can't see, which are the microbes, which are phytoplanktons. They are also the flora. You have zooplanktons, which are the fauna. Then you have the fungi, you have microbes. All of this, what you can see and what you cannot see, forms the life part of this photograph. Now, what makes an ecosystem is the fact that in any landscape, there is a continuous exchange of matter and energy between the physical elements and the biological elements. Right, so the sunlight is taken by these biological elements, it's converted into organic matter, and it's continuously exchanged within the food chain, within the food web, and it gets recycled as nutrients. And this is what is called as an ecosystem. So in a landscape with physical elements, with biological elements, and the constant exchange of matter and energy creates what is called as an ecosystem. So this picture which you see is actually a small riverine ecosystem which is doing that. So there are two basic things in any ecosystem. You have habitats, which are the physical elements. So you have water, soil, rocks, waterfalls, riffles, puddles, erosion, deposition, crevices, all of this which you can see and which you can't see. And then you have the communities. Then you have the phytoplanktons, you have the herbs, the shrubs, zooplanktons, insects, fish, crustaceans, reptiles, so on and so forth. So these are the communities which are interacting within each other and within their habitat and exchanging matter and energy, and which are giving rise to this ecosystem. So let me just spend some time about understanding what I mean by exchange of matter and energy, because this is a very critical part in any ecosystem. So exchange of matter and energy, if you look at that, basically, as I just said, solar, we are all solar powered on this planet. So whatever sunlight is falling is the only source of renewable energy on the planet. And it is hitting the soil and the water. There are nutrients in the soil and water which are taken up by plants. These plants are eaten by animals. This is basic school biology. There is a defecation and death, and then they get back into the soil and water. So, and for each of these activities, you need solar power. So there is sunlight falling on this. If you add up all the green arrows, that is what we call as exchange of matter. So the food is being eaten by the herbivores. The herbivores are eaten by the carnivores. They defecate, they die, and they fall into that. All of this is an exchange of matter which is happening in the landscape. And all the yellow arrows are essentially exchanges of energy. So even between the exchange of matter, there is going to happen an exchange of energy. When I eat food, I'm actually converting that matter into energy for my body to work in. And every organism on the planet does that. And this forms a very healthy ecosystem here. But yeah, like I said, so the communities and the habitats are the things which are essentially working here. But we know the exchange of matter and energy with a completely different name, right? And that is food production. The trees produce food. That is essentially exchange of matter and energy. The hydrological cycle is essentially a matter of exchange of matter and energy. The carbon cycle, nitrogen, phosphorus cycle, the atmospheric gas balance, because there is 20% of oxygen in the air. It is because of exchange of matter and energy. Decomposition and nutrient cycling. Hello, I was saying, we know the exchange of matter and energy by all these names. And you can add 50 more names into that. This is not a complete thing about what it is. But seed dispersal is exchange of matter. Pollination is an exchange of matter and energy. Groundwater recharge. All of these are critical ecosystem services, which are called as ecosystem services. But most importantly, this is what sustains life on the planet. Simply because exchange of matter and energy between the physical elements and the biological elements, we get all these services which are able to sustain, are able to get food from plants. Plants are the only organisms on the entire planet who can make their own food. All other plants produce far more food than they need for themselves. They have literally millions of leaves, which they eat, the fruits, all of that they produce in excess. And the entire world runs upon the energy produced from the excess food which the plants generate. So this is what is the primary food production, and that these are the ecosystem services which are looking at that. Coming back quickly to rivers. If you look at the rivers, like I said earlier, they'll have physical features, they'll have biological features, and most importantly, the biological and the physical features, between them, they create natural processes which are continuously happening. Remember, the river is not a flow of water, it is a flow of energy. It is continuously doing something to the landscape. And what are the physical features of the river? You have water, you have rainfall, you have a certain temperature. At the source region, it's colder. At the mouth, it's warmer. The substratum, it keeps changing. In the Himalayas, the substratum is different. In the Deccan Traps, the substratum is different. The altitude which changes, the meanders, soil, streams, springs, all of these form the physical features of the river. The biological components would be the flora and the fauna, the crustaceans, the reptiles, the fish, all of this, the aquatic life forms, the riparian zone which you have, all of this is the biological component. And the processes which are continuously happening are essentially three types. You have the physical processes, which are flooding, which are erosion, which are deposition. The flooding is an extremely natural characteristic of any river. Why it creates a problem for us is because we start inhabiting the places where it's going to flood. without giving due consideration that rivers must flood. And because of flooding, you have deposition, you have erosion. Then there are chemical processes which are going on, there are biological processes that are going on. And because all this is happening, at the meeting point of all three, we get all the ecological services of a river. So we get the nutrient cycling, the transport of nutrients from one place to another, irrigation of forest, irrigation of riparian vegetation, seed transport. The dispersal of flora takes place through rivers and streams. Soil moisture recharge, groundwater recharge, mineral mixing, carbon cycle. All of these kind of things are the ecological services of a river. And that is what is the ecological value of a river. Interestingly, value for us. All of this is what our agriculture is based upon. All of this is what agriculture is, the primary economy of man. Whatever happens in agriculture, the surplus that we produce in agriculture is used to create the surplus that we produce from the industrial economy, right? So for agriculture, the river is critical. Not just critical, it is, you cannot live without these ecological services that a river provides there. So yeah, like you see in this picture, if you take the cross section of the river, you'll have the riparian zone, which is the large trees and the shrubs, which are, pardon my poor sketching skills, but I'm just trying to show you this. Then you have some rooted aquatic vegetation, then you will have some sediments, floating aquatic vegetation, all of that. And then you will have the hyphoric zone, which is the zone which is just below the river bed. And it is continuously getting recharged from that. The rivers, the riparian zone is sucking the water and providing it to its own irrigation for itself, so on and so forth. Right, and then you have some floating vegetation. All of this is happening because there is all the detritus and debris which is falling from the organic matter. This organic matter is continuously falling as nutrients, and it is degraded by these algae, by these microbes, the grazers, the shredders, the predators, the collectors, all of this. So what starts off as leaves and wood pieces falling into the river are continuously shredded into fine particulate organic matter, which is FPOM, and POM, which is coarse particulate organic matter. So first it gets coarse and then it gets finer and finer. And this is the nutrient addition to the rivers. So if you look at these two pictures, the one on the left is a full-fledged ecosystem. Unfortunately, the one on the right does not have a variety of habitats. It does not have any variety of communities. It is simply flowing water. It is not an ecosystem. It will not provide all the services of the ecosystem. There is no nutrient cycling, there is no carbon cycle, there is no groundwater recharge. It's because we have created embankments. It's because we have created a concrete canal. It's not a river. So this is what we do when we create riverfront development projects. We enclose the river in a cement concrete coffin and we kill all the ecological services. And we are fighting right now for the Pune riverfront development. We are fighting against it. And when you replace this riparian vegetation with cities, then there is no organic matter going to be added except one. And cities are the humongous contributors of urban detritus, of urban poop. All of that is getting added as sewage and a chemical load. So all our toothpaste, our shampoos, our washing machine detergents, all of this are going to be added to the sewage which comes out from a river, from a city, and then gets added into the water. So therefore, after the river passes through a large city, it is almost completely dead in terms of ecological services. The detritus, the shredders, the predators, they are unable to survive in this huge inorganic load and organic load which cities create, and then they start dying slowly. And then what happens is you get cities, you get rivers full of waters, but that's all sewage water. So Yeah, we do have some time, and I'll just talk about one case study of the Ram Nadi restoration mission. So Ram Nadi is a very small river which is flowing into Pune city. It originates in a place called Khatpewadi, Jarseshwar Hills, actually, which is about 20 kilometers uh, to the west of Pune, 20 kilometers to the west of Pune, and then it flows to join the Mula. So the this river is very small, like I said, 19 kilometers. It's a narrow tributary of the Mula. It originates to the southwest of the Pune city. I made a mistake here, and flows towards the northeast. And there are three major lakes on the rivers which are created. Khatpewadi, Manas, and Pashan Lake. Those of you who have been to Pune would probably have seen the Pashan Lake. It's a huge lake. We have over 3 lakh inhabitants in the entire basin, and this basin comes in from Gram Panchayats, though there are 3 Gram Panchayats and 1 municipal corporation in this particular thing. So this is the river which we are trying to restore here, and so this is a schematic of the rivers, yeah, right? So the Mula, Mutha, and the Ram Nadi. This is the very. There are 13 organizations which are working on the Ram Nadi restoration mission. I think it must be the only program in the entire country, and they are working even today on this particular mission. So that's one big phenomenal thing which has happened in the Ram Nadi restoration mission. I have not seen so many NGOs come and work together. Like I said, the Ram Nadi meets the Mula, it then meets the Bhima, Krishna, Bay of Bengal. Yeah, so that's very quickly. So what's wrong with the Ram Nadi? Why do we say that it's a degraded riverine ecosystem? So there are 3 reasons why the Ram Nadi is a degraded ecosystem. There are quantitative indicators which tell us it is degraded. There are qualitative indicators, and there are birds as indicators of ecological destruction. Let us look at the quantitative indicators. The first and the most important quantitative indicator is it is non-potable water. If you pick up the water, this BOD and COD is gone haywire. It has got a lot of organic matter. It's got a lot of fertilizers. It's got a lot of chemical loads, which simply you cannot drink. There is a significant reduction in the carbon sequestration which has happened. That's just because there is a complete loss of the riparian forest cover. There is ornamental flora which is planted at societies which are around the Ram Nadi. The Ram Nadi passes through 2-3 suburbs of Pune, which is the Baudan, Baner, and Pashan, which are really the affluent suburbs of Pune city, and they all have large societies and they have plantations of ornamental flora, but they have taken away all the riparian forest cover which was present. The third indicator is dry wells in the region, which means that there is no constant recharge which is happening of the wells in that particular area. So there is lower groundwater recharge, and then many of the societies need to buy water from tankers here. There are very poor dissolved oxygen levels. You actually need more than 8 ppm parts per million of oxygen for life to survive. Unfortunately, in many parts of the Ram Nadi, we have encountered oxygen levels of less than 5 ppm, which are not going to sustain too much life. It will sustain invasive life forms, but not the entire biodiversity. And then the changes in the biodiversity. You see a lot of non-native fish. We see reduced migrant birds. We see a lot of water hyacinth and pistia. We see eupatorium and lantana on the banks instead of the riparian vegetation. It's all these invasive biological species which you see here. Qualitative indicators: agro productivity has reduced, the foul smell in the vicinity, the Ram Nadi has become a mosquito breeding ground. There are several waterborne diseases which are there around the banks. Crop nutrition is reduced, and it's aesthetically repulsive. You don't feel like looking at the river. It's really, really bad. There are several ecological indicators, as we say, and ecological indicators are basically bioindicators which tell you the health of the river. So this was a beautiful bird which used to fly in from Ladakh. This is the bar-headed goose, which used to come to the Pashan Lake. But today, these bar-headed geese don't come there because that habitat has degraded. This is a beautiful bird called a skimmer. It keeps its beak open and flies just skims the water. You don't no longer see the skimmer in the water bodies here. On the other hand, okay, for this beautiful kingfisher, the pied kingfisher, black and white kingfisher. The normal kingfisher which you see is the white-throated kingfisher. It's a blue-colored kingfisher with the brown head and the white throat which it has. And that's a very, very urban bird. That's because it can survive. It needs crystal clear, unpolluted water. And this used to be, you see this today, or the painted snipe, and this little fellow which comes from Ladakh. So this is a black-winged stilt. Now, this is an indicator of highly polluted water because this is water which has got very high phosphate loads. Phosphate load is because of the detergents that the city uses. So all of this were telling us that the Ram Nadi is a degraded ecosystem. What are the various approaches to river restoration? If you look at the river restoration approaches, there are three major approaches. One is the beautification approach, which you find many cities are spending thousands of crores of rupees for that. You make nice concrete embankments, you have walking plazas, cycling plazas, all of that you do that, and you have some STPs, sewage treatment plants. That's basically a beautification. Then you have the technology approach, which is essentially using end of pipe technology, which is sewage treatment plants. And Pune is a city where we are going to spend thousands of crore, and then this is a purely technological approach. And the third major one is an ecological approach, wherein you consider the ecology of the river, and then you're trying to restore the ecology. You're not trying to beautify, you're not trying to use technology, but you're trying to mimic nature. So while the first two are very urban-centric approaches, the ecological approach is the only one which is a participative approach and has got a behavioral aspect to it. It essentially tries to change the behaviors of human beings with the rivers. And that's why you need community participation in this. And we picked up the choice of ecological approach with minimum technology, which is going to be used. So what is the ecological approach all about? First and foremost, the ecological approach considers the rivers of the ecosystem services. We consider it as a living river. The second is we work not just on tree plantation. We just meanders, the rocks, the pools, the riffles, the waterfalls, all the physical elements of the river, working not just on the river channel, but on the entire river basin. Right? Many of the river rejuvenation programs are about the river channels. They're not about the entire basin. Then the ecological approach is also about changing human-river relationships. How do you change the behavior? Today, citizens of Pune do not even know that there are rivers which flow. They know there are rivers only because they have to cross a bridge. That's it. And that's their relation which they have today with the rivers of Pune. We are trying to change that. And most importantly, mimicking nature instead of using technology, creating habitats, creating spaces for the food chain to develop, creating, conserving the natural processes which are happening in the river. All of this is about mimicking nature. And finally, it's also about environmental justice. It is not just about how humans perceive a river, but it's also about how the river as a living entity is a habitat for such humongous biodiversity. Caring for each of the smallest phytoplanktons, caring for each of the smallest flora, zooplanktons, microbes, all of that. So the ecological restoration program that we have embarked has got 10 basic steps. The first is protection. protection from dumping, from solid waste, from after we protect the entire river, then it needs cleaning, because we have degraded the river banks and all of it right now. And it's about thinking of how to manage the solid waste within its basin. How do you segregate? How do we stop throwing people? How do we disallow people from throwing it into the river? So on and so forth. What do you do with the plastic? What do you do with the organic matter? All of that. Sewage management. So a lot of these societies have got sewage treatment plants, and they dump their sewage after the STP into the Ram Nadi. But that's not the best way to treat the water. So what is it that we can do with sewage management? Is there any tertiary treatment that we can do? Can we use bioremediation? Can we use a reed bed system, phyto-reed system? There are various biological means. Plantations, like I said, is the low-hanging fruit. Everybody wants to dig a pit, plant a tree, take a photograph and go away. But plantations by themselves are not going to improve the river unless you do the other things. So plantations are very important, but we cannot go overboard. We can't start planting trees everywhere where the river is there. There are zones of erosion, there are zones of deposition. We have to take care of that. We have to respect that. Most importantly, we are advocating only manual work in river restoration. We don't want to bring JCBs and large earth movers. That's not the big idea. We really don't want to harm the river more than we have already harmed. So manual work, getting your feet there and doing that is what we are looking at. Most importantly, we are also trying to persuade farmers in the entire basin to move towards sustainable organic farming, where they don't use chemical fertilizers, where the water doesn't run off into the river. And continuously throughout the year, we are engaging schools and colleges for surveys and documentation, and citizen participation being the most important one. But the granddaddy of all the ecological restoration program things is about a sustainable lifestyle in the basin. It's not just about the river, but it's about human beings and their relationship with the river. So this is what we are trying to do in the entire program. And we have divided the river into stretches, and each one of the organizations have taken one stretch for that. I'm not going to spend too much time, but then we made a river restoration plan. I've made this 14-page template about what needs to be documented throughout the year. What is it that you need to look at? What are the resource plan, financial plan? This template is being used by some other rivers also in the country now. What do we do on each zone? So there are essentially 5 major things which we are doing. We are documenting the biotic aspects, the flora, fauna. We are looking at the general character, where are the meanders, where are the areas of deposition. We are looking at the flow. Is it narrow? Is it deep? Is it wide? All of that. Where is it that we can create new habitats? What are general habitats? What are special habitats? What all interventions are done in the river? Is there a dhobi ghat? Is there a samadhi? Is there a cultural zone? Is there a temple? All of these kinds of things we have documented there. And then we prepare the plan for the river restoration. So the river restoration plan, ecological plan, will essentially have community level work, which will be of society, citizen group. It will have basin level work, which is awareness within citizens. We need to work with the Gram Panchayat, the Sarpanch, the Gram Sabha, the Talati. We have to take them into consideration. The urban local body, which is Pune Metropolitan Region Development Authority, Pune Municipal Corporation, all of them, and some policy interventions. We are meeting our local MLA and MP commissioners, and we are getting them to do all of this. And this is also about behavioral change, lifestyle change, administrative change, technological and governance change, and finally, mindset change. So this broadly would give you what we are doing with the Ram Nadi River Restoration Project. And obviously, there are many other things which are there in that, but because I have already exceeded my time, it's 6:50. So I'm just going to stop here, and maybe we can discuss a little bit about what you people are doing in your rivers, and is there anything that we can share our ideas and things like that?